All right, let's get into it today. We're diving deep into a concept that can really impact how you see your everyday choices, and I think it can apply to a lot of different areas of your life.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at this idea that destruction, like whether it's personal or financial, it happens first slowly, then suddenly.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how a line from a book like Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises can be so powerful for understanding life, like
Yeah.
life choices.
Yeah.
And all these sources you sent me, they all touch on this in different ways, from like behavioral economics,
Yeah.
that study on spending habits, to that philosophical essay on moral compromise.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're going to see how this quote plays out in like those small everyday choices, the kind we don't even think about until bam, things aren't so great.
It's like that slow leak in your tire. You might not notice it first, but if you just ignore it, you can end up stranded.
Okay, so let's start with I guess like the tire pressure gauge of personal finance, that stuff that keeps our lives rolling smoothly. What are like some of those slow leaks we should be looking out for?
Well, think about those times you might have bought something, you know, like something you didn't really need.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you put off creating a budget because you thought, I'll get to it later.
Oh, for sure. I think we've all been there. It's easy to think like, one latte isn't going to break the bank, or, I deserve to treat myself after this long week.
Right. And like those choices by themselves
Yeah.
might not be a big deal, but over time, they create this pattern of overspending. And that puts a strain on your finances, kind of like those little cracks in a bridge. By themselves, they don't seem like much, but enough of them, the whole thing could be compromised.
Yeah, and I imagine the suddenly part comes in when an unexpected expense pops up, like car repairs, a medical bill, and all of a sudden you're scrambling because you don't have that financial cushion.
Exactly. That's when the consequences of those small choices, they become so obvious. It's like you've been walking on a stable surface, but the whole time it was thin ice.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling through that ice? What are some like practical steps to make sure our financial foundation is, solid?
So one strategy that has really helped me is something called the 30-day rule. So anytime you are tempted to buy something, especially something that's not like totally essential, just wait 30 days before you buy it.
That's a great tip. I can see how that would help curb impulse spending. It gives you time to think about if you really need something or if you just caught up in the moment.
Exactly. And often, after 30 days, that urge to buy, it's just gone.
But what about times when you have to make a bigger financial decision, like taking out a loan or buying something big? How do we apply this slowly then suddenly concept to those types of things?
I think it's all about doing your research and really being prepared for any potential downsides. So let's say you're thinking about buying a new car. Don't just focus on the cool features and, the monthly payment that fits your budget now. Take some time to research how much it'll cost to repair, factor in, like gas prices, insurance, and really think about how buying that car will impact your long-term goals.
So it's about looking past that initial excitement and thinking about those long-term consequences of the choices we make. Kind of like thinking, what's the worst that could happen and having a plan.
Exactly. It's about thinking about those cracks, before they become huge problems in your financial foundation.
It makes me think about how we tend to compartmentalize our decisions, like thinking, okay, this is a financial choice or this is an ethical dilemma, but it seems like they're connected, right? Like a financial decision can totally have ethical implications and vice versa.
Oh, for sure. And that's where this whole slowly then suddenly idea gets really interesting. So think about a situation where you might, be tempted to fudge some numbers at work
Hmm.
to maybe like boost your performance or maybe get a bigger bonus. It might seem like a financial decision.
Yeah, you might say, like, I need the money, or, well, everybody else is doing it.
Exactly. But that small compromise, it can start to erode your sense of like your integrity. And then later on, you might find yourself in a much bigger ethical situation. And that earlier choice, it makes it easier to justify, doing something more drastic.
So it's like those small, almost insignificant choices can build into this slippery slope, taking us further from our values. It's almost like dominoes, where one small ethical lapse can trigger a chain reaction.
It's like they say, character is what you do when nobody's watching.
Yeah.
Every time we make a choice, even a small one, we're either strengthening our values or we're chipping away at them.
This is fascinating stuff, and I can already see how this could help people make more informed choices in their lives. But before we get too deep into the ethics side of things, why don't we take this back up in part two?
When we were talking about finances before the break, it really connects to like a broader point here. Often that suddenly it's not always about uh like external things.
Hmm.
It can also be about like an internal shift that happens when we cross a line, you know?
Hmm.
One we didn't even realize we were close to.
So it's not just the practical consequences, but the impact our choices have on like who we are, our integrity.
Yeah, exactly. Like one day you wake up and you're just not the person you thought you were, you
Yeah.
know? You become someone who cuts corners and tells little white lies and prioritizes, just convenience over doing the right thing.
It reminds me of the story you sent me about the accountant who started, fudging little expenses on company reports. He was saying it was just a few bucks here and there, but like it turned into embezzling thousands of dollars.
Yeah, that's like the perfect example, right? It shows how those little choices can snowball. Each compromise just chips away at your internal compass, making it easier to justify the next one. And then suddenly you're capable of things you never thought you would do.
It's like our morality has its own credit score, and every compromise is like a ding on that score.
I like that. That's a great analogy. And just like a bad credit score limits your options, a messed up moral compass does the same thing. It can ruin trust in relationships, damage your reputation, could even lead to legal problems.
And that's where that illusion of control comes in, right? We think we're in control, but those compromises are changing things without us realizing it.
Totally. We tell ourselves, I can stop whenever I want, or this is just a one-time thing. But really, those choices, they kind of build on each other, and it gets harder to break free. It's like being stuck in a rip current. The more you fight it, the harder it is to swim back.
So how do we avoid being swept away by that current? How can we like build up that moral strength, the strength to stick to our values?
One thing that helps me is just like regularly thinking about my core values. Like, what are the things that are truly important to me? Is it honesty, integrity, fairness, compassion? Write them down, really picture them, and ask yourself, am I living up to these?
Yeah, that's great advice. Like having a mission statement to guide you. But what about when there's pressure to compromise? Like if your boss wants you to do something shady or you see a friend cheating.
Oh man, those are tough situations.
All right.
There's no easy answer, but having a strong sense of self and knowing your boundaries, that can make a big difference. It's about having the courage to say no, even if there might be consequences.
That takes a lot of guts, especially when you could lose your job or, hurt a friendship.
It does.
Yeah.
But remember, doing the right thing, even if it's hard in the moment, is way less painful than living with a bad decision.
Yeah, it makes me think about how important it is to be around people who share your values. Like, if your friends are always cutting corners, it's got to be way harder to stay true to yourself. Oh, absolutely. The people you hang out with have a huge impact on your choices. It's like that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? Be around people who value integrity, and it'll be easier to stay on that path yourself.
This whole conversation is making me think about something you said earlier about how this slowly then suddenly concept,
Hmm.
it applies to destruction and decreation. We've talked a lot about the negative, the pitfalls and all that. What about the good stuff? How can we use this idea to create positive change?
I'm glad you brought that up. That's where things get really exciting. Just like those small bad choices can pile up and lead to problems, those small good choices can add up and create awesome momentum for growth and transformation.
So it's like compound interest, but applied to personal growth and ethical living. Yes, exactly. Think about it. What if you commit to making one tiny positive change every day? Maybe it's like practicing gratitude or doing something nice for someone or even just saving a few dollars. Those little actions over time can have a huge impact on you and your ability to, make a difference in the world.
This is making me feel a lot more optimistic, honestly. It's like we have the power to choose our own path, to write a story of growth and positive change instead of one of decline and regret.
That's exactly it. We're not just victims of circumstance, right? We have choices. We have the power to make choices that shape who we are, our finances, and our impact on the world.
This is seriously inspiring, but I know it can be kind of overwhelming to think about changing everything at once. So, like, where do we even begin?
I think the key is to start small. Pick one area of your life that you want to improve. Maybe it's your finances, your health, your relationships, whatever. And then just find one small thing you can do today to move in the right direction. Don't try to do everything at once. Just build those positive habits one step at a time.
So it's about focusing on the small wins, those baby steps that create a sense of like progress and momentum.
You got it. And remember, Progress isn't always a straight line. There will be setbacks and challenges, but the key is to keep learning, keep growing, and just keep moving forward.
This has been so insightful. I feel like we've covered a lot from like personal finance to the complexities of ethics. But before we finish up, I want to hear your thoughts on how slowly then suddenly plays out on a bigger scale, like with organizations, societies, even global trends.
That's a great question, and it's really where this idea gets super relevant.
Hmm.
Think about the environmental crisis. Scientists have been warning us about climate change forever, but for a lot of people, it just felt very far off, something that would happen someday.
Right. It was easy to just ignore and continue doing things the same way, but now we can't ignore it anymore. There are crazy weather events, rising sea levels, all this ecological damage.
Exactly. It's slowly, then suddenly in action. All those little choices, driving cars that use a ton of gas, wasting energy, supporting practices that aren't sustainable, all of that added up over time. And now we have this global crisis that needs immediate action.
It's a serious reminder that it's not just about personal accountability, it's about collective responsibility too. Our choices together, A and D as individuals, they really impact things.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand this. It's not just about avoiding personal mistakes. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and we all have a responsibility to make the world a better, more sustainable place.
This whole conversation has really changed how I think about things. It's
Yeah.
made me realize that every decision, no matter how small it seems, has an impact. You know, it can either contribute to a good world or take away from it.
And that's a powerful thing to realize.
Yeah.
It means that we all have the power to create our own lives and to some extent create our collective future as well.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's like one final thought you want to leave with our listeners? Like a parting piece of wisdom about this slowly then suddenly idea.
I'd say this, don't wait for that suddenly to happen. Pay attention to the little changes going on in your life and in the world. Those are the warning signs, telling you that something needs to change.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, right? How this idea can apply to such huge things. We started with like lattes and impulse buys, and now we're talking about the whole planet.
I know, it's wild. It
Yeah.
really shows how big this concept is. And we see it throughout history too, right?
Yeah.
Empires falling, economies collapsing. It's rarely a sudden thing. It's usually a slow buildup of unsustainable stuff, ignored warnings, just like a failure to course correct.
It's like we're all walking toward a cliff, but we're too busy looking at our feet to see the big picture.
Yeah, and I think that's why conversations like this are so important. It helps us zoom out and see the patterns before it's too late.
It's easy to feel powerless when you think about these huge issues. But honestly, this conversation makes me feel more empowered because it reminds me that even small things can make a difference, especially when we all work together.
Oh, absolutely. Look at how powerful social movements are. They usually start with just a few people who see something wrong and decide to
Right.
speak up and do something about it. And then slowly it starts to build and like inspires others to join.
It's like that quote, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
That's it. It's about realizing that we're not just watching things happen. We have a voice and we have choices to make. And by using our voices and making conscious choices, we can help build a better future.
This whole deep dive has been such a good reminder that we're all in this together. Our choices have an impact, and even little actions can create big change.
And that's really what I hope people take away from this, that feeling of like agency,
Hmm.
knowing that we're not just along for the ride, we're shaping our lives and our future together.
Well said. So let's go back to that Hemingway quote we started with, that destruction often comes slowly, then all at once. What's the most important thing for our listeners to remember about this idea?
I think the biggest thing is don't wait for that suddenly to hit you. Pay attention to the slow changes happening in your own life and in the world. Those are the warning signs that something needs to change.
So be proactive, take responsibility for where your life is going and how you impact the world. Don't wait for a crisis to happen. Start making those small positive changes now.
That's right. And hey, even if you mess up, even if you make mistakes, it's never too late to get back on track. Every day is a chance to build a better future, one choice at a time.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today.
My pleasure. And big thanks to our listener for sending these amazing sources. They sparked this whole deep dive.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you feel inspired to go out there and make those small choices that can lead to big changes. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep making those choices that matter.